And bailing out these big mega banks when they make these terrible decisions and take the money and run, that's really hurting uh,
Where's the
the
small guy?
that's a small guy. So
Welcome to the Cashflow Academy podcast. This is where we do our very best to make investing simple. I'm Andy Tanner, and we've got a very important show, a lot of great information today. We're going to talk about some very, some things that are vital, quite frankly, to, the future of banking, the future of investing, and really economics. So big topics. Excuse me, a little reminder to go to yourinvestingclass.com. That's where you can learn more about the teaching that we do, and hope you find some things that are valuable for you there. Today, my guest is Gerald Epstein, and he's written a book called, it's about the Fed, and it's called Busting the Bankers Club, Finance for the Rest of Us. So we're going to talk about the Bankers Club, which is an accurate title in my opinion. But I'm excited to have Gerald Epstein with us. Gerald, thanks for being on the program.
thanks a lot for having me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So yes, I'm Gerald Epstein, professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'm also a founding co-director of the Political Economy Research Institute. And we do research on all kinds of applied economic issues, and one of them is finance and banking. So I've written this book, Busting the Bankers Club, Finance for the Rest of Us, published by University of California Press just last month, January 2024. And I'm looking forward to telling your listeners about it.
This is fun for me. I was a really subpar basketball player in college. I always boast that I was the worst player in the history of my school. I could foul people. That was pretty much why they had me around. I could level someone if they needed that.
That's pretty funny.
As a student, I did my best to stay eligible, and it's so funny because I get the opportunity to speak with guys like you, and I would have never even been admitted to the university there, And I found my love of learning, later in life for some reason. I didn't realize that economics and finance, and in particular investing, would be such a passion of mine. While I was in school playing basketball, it was just not in my purview. And once I found it, I was like, oh man, I wish I could do that over. So now I get to go to school a half hour at a time without being formally admitted. And I don't know that I could pass the admissions test these days. But let's talk a little bit about the Bankers Club. That's a great title. What is the Bankers Club, and who are the members of this club?
So the Bankers Club is the group of bankers and politicians and regulatory institutions and lawyers and economists, all of whom support the banks in their political fights to get bailouts and to get deregulated and to get bigger and more profitable. I started this book after the Lehman collapse, and I was starting to think, well, you know, shouldn't we be regulating these banks and not bailing them out? And after the Dodd-Frank law was passed, and I saw that no, we really were not going to end too big to fail with the Dodd-Frank law. It wasn't nearly enough. So I'm wondering, how is it that the mega banks, I'm not talking about the small community banks and so forth, I'll talk about them later, but the mega banks like Goldman Sachs and Citibank and Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, et cetera, how is it that they are able to remain so powerful, so profitable, pay their CEOs so much money, despite threatening to or actually crashing our economy every 10 or 15 years and getting bailouts in the process? And
Yeah.
I looked around, and I thought, well, banks are not that popular in our country. I have a regular exercise in one of my classes. I ask my students, come up. I have them watch movies about banking, and I say, please come up with some movies that are sympathetic towards bankers. And the only movie they've been able to come up with is It's a Wonderful Life, and that was in 1946. So banks really aren't that popular. So how do they remain so powerful? And I looked into it, and I saw that they have a whole group of allies that they have organized and paid off that support them. So I call the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the club. Um, they're the most powerful, financial or banking organization in our country and probably in the world. And I think too often they make policy not in the public interest, but in the interest of the big banks. And we can see that with the bailouts. But it's not just the Fed. Of course, it's the politicians that the big banks are able to pay off and give campaign contributions to. But not just campaign contributions. They give revolving door jobs to politicians and the staff, when they leave office. And then there are the regulatory agencies. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, they're like the foxes guarding the hen houses. They're supposed to be regulating the banks and other financial institutions, but too often we find them just supporting the banks and the financial institutions, and they too get great revolving door jobs when they leave the regulatory agencies. Um, uh, and lawyers are an important part of this because
Oh,
they help the
yes.
regulatory agencies and work for the banks. And I'm sorry to say, people of my own profession, too many economists uh, kind of refuse to really understand how this whole system works and end up kind of shilling for the banks. You said, you wish you had taken economics courses when you were in college, but in fact, the part of the problem is many economists don't really teach what's really going on.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
that's what I was trying to do with this book.
The late Charlie Munger, when I just love him, and he's so funny. Buffett was going on, and he'll say, Charlie, what do you think? And Charlie always just has a one-liner. And he said, much of what is taught in modern finance is twaddle. And that's all he said. That's all he said,
Well, that says it all, doesn't it?
Isn't that just like Charlie? It's so
Yeah.
fantastic. So we'll talk about this politically, and then we'll try to bring it down to the individual person who's trying to invest through this mess.
Yeah.
What I find fascinating is, two ideas. First of all, we have corporations where if they have a balance sheet with liabilities on it called pensions, and they have these funds they're supposed to be take care of their pensioners, and that, much like the Studebaker Company set the standard for bankruptcy in the 60s. They say, we can't afford this, so we go out of business like the Studebaker Company. But now it is amazing that with Chapter 11 and in a municipality, Chapter 9, you slam a gavel and all those liabilities and promises of promised money are gone. It's not borrowed money, it's promised money, the big difference. And so I think that's an interesting thing, that the corporations can be relieved or bailed out of those with a slap of a gavel. Then you have, 2008, where, these CDOs and these toxic assets, the high leveraged instruments intertwined throughout the economic system. And, the Fed shrugs its shoulders, says, well, we'll grant ourselves some power and we'll buy these assets. And to me, that's just amazing that, you have a horrible investment that's going to bring you down, and they'll reward you by giving you cash.
Yeah.
You think about that from like a business owner standpoint. If I made a bad investment and I could just say, I'd like to trade that for cash, just give me cold hard cash, and someone will buy that investment simply because they think I shouldn't fail. That is not a capitalist idea. That is a socialist idea, because I'm doing it in the name of society. I'm doing it in the name of protecting the masses. I'm doing it in the name of saying all too big to fail is it will hurt a lot of people too much. And the capitalist in me says, look, part of capitalism is failing. Part of capitalism is if you over leverage, and if you go out and that's like the Bernanke put. If I feel that I have a put option, basically a Bernanke put or a Fed put, why would I not misbehave? Why would I not over leverage?
That's right. And so, when we talk about, it's not capitalist, the way capitalism is taught in Econ 101, that's certainly true. But unfortunately, it's become the way that capitalism often operates in practice. And you say that it's socialism. Well, I think of it as kind of lemon socialism. That is, it's buying the lemons, it's bailing out the people who, made the rotten lemons and letting everybody else pay for it. So it's really
Yeah,
unfair. It's really unfair to the small investor. It's really unfair to the taxpayer. It's really unfair to the small banks who don't get these kinds of bailouts.
yeah,
And what it does, it gives you talked about the Greenspan put, that means, putting a floor on the asset values. And so the people who have a lot of wealth, they get a guarantee just on the upside. And bailing out these big mega banks when they make these terrible decisions and take the money and run, that's really hurting uh,
it's a
the
small guy.
that's a small guy. So I think that is really the problem, and it doesn't have to be that way. It really does not have to be that way. I think the problem that the Ben Bernanke's of the world and so forth see is that, and the Tim Geithners, who was the Treasury Secretary under Obama and all, they're worried that if they don't bail out these banks, that the whole system is going to collapse. And that's partly because they've let these banks get too big to fail. But what I always say is, well, even if, and I'm not sure you have to, but even if you have to bail out the banks, you do not have to bail out the bankers.
Mm,
You do not
interesting.
have to bail out the people who
That's
made
a
the
great
terrible
distinction.
decisions and take the money and run. I mean, look what happened
Yeah.
under the Obama administration when during the great financial crisis when General Motors was in trouble. What
Yes.
did they do? They came in and yes, they infused a lot of money into General Motors, but they had strings attached. They demanded that General Motors get rid of their top management. They made the unions take haircuts,
Ouch.
um, and they also demanded management changes. What did they do with the banks? Zippo. They let the big bankers take their bonuses, the people who had made these bad decisions, and laughed their way all the way, to the Bahamas, wherever it is that they put the bonus.
It's a it's a fascinating world of I don't believe in Bigfoot. I'm not when someone starts talking conspiracy, I just roll my eyes because we're given to that as people. But when there's that much money involved, people will get together and they'll make decisions and they'll greed is a very real thing. And
Well, it's a
so
structural problem. Yeah.
it really is. So let's talk a little bit about this. Let's talk about the club busters.
Yeah.
So, we have it seems like, Warren Buffett talks about the moat and of a business and how hard it would be to take down a business that was really good. This is quite a moat because we have the Fed is an interesting, the history of it's fascinating. The Jekyll Island stuff is an interesting history. We don't need to go into that. But pretty powerful institution in the world.
That's right.
They get to decide what interest rates are because they have this theory of risk free. And I thought it was interesting. Janet Yellen, she just kills me. Janet Yellen's an academic. I'm not a fan of Janet myself. I don't know that she's ever done anything in a real business. Maybe she has, and I don't know. I feel like she's kind of been more of an academic that has become a policymaker. But Janet is screaming that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, there's going to be a massive catastrophe. I mean, the word she used was catastrophe. It's going to be awful. It's going to melt down. And so they raise the debt ceiling, and then you have the credit agencies take away the AAA rating for the second time, right? Moody's did it first, I think. And then Janet said, oh, this is silly to take away our credit rating. We're as solid as can be. I'm like, well, a week ago, you were saying this is a danger. So I just, how do you bust this? Who are the
Well,
Bankers Club busters?
well, yes. Let me first talk about the debt and all that, and Janet Yellen. So, if you read carefully, what Janet Yellen is saying is, well, even if you have to bail out the banks, you do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers. You do not have to bail out the bankers what the credit rating agencies said about why they raised or lowered the credit
Lowered
rating.
it.
It wasn't so much because the U.S. debt is high, which it is. You have to remember though that the U.S. dollar is king in the globe, and people
Still
want to
is.
hold dollars and dollar-denominated assets. So there are
Yep.
plenty of people wanting to buy U.S. debt. But the problem is this political impasse that we have in our country,
Exactly.
and the fact
The
that they can't
saber
pass
rattling.
budgets.
The
So
saber
there's
rattling.
that's a complicated thing. It's not just the level of the debt, but by the
I
club
agree.
busters, I mean, who is it that is out there trying to create a financial system that really works for the little guy, that works for the individual investor, the small businesses, the homeowners who just want to, take out a reasonable mortgage and buy a house and not get it pulled out from under them? Who's really looking out for the small businesses or the marginalized communities in big cities, the farmers who need loans at a reasonable rate? Who's looking out for them? And it's certainly not the big banks, and it's certainly not a lot of these big institutions. So I'm looking for groups in the country and individuals who are fighting for the little guy. And these include um, groups like the American for Financial Reform is a reform group in Washington. The Better Markets, which is another group in Washington that's really trying to fight for the little guy and against
Yeah.
the big banks. But I'm also looking for people who organize in communities, who are organizing community banks, public banks, this kind of thing, to try to make the financial system work for the rest of us. And there are lots of them out there, and they just need a little bit of help. And when I talk about a little bit of help, what I mean is the Federal Reserve gives trillions of dollars of bailouts to the mega banks and the big financial institutions, as we've just talked about, but they don't really have a framework that really supports small banks. We've had a huge
Yeah.
banking consolidation in our country. 70,000
Yep.
small and community banks have gone poof, over the last 15, 20 years. Who's out there really trying to give them liquidity help when they need it? Give them tax breaks like they give the big banks? Nobody. So I'm looking for these club busters to really help these community, small banks, cooperative banks, public banks that are really going to help out all of us. I'm also looking for them to really um, you talked about pensions. I'm really looking for some way to force these pension managers to really take into account the interests of the people whose money they're managing. I mean, look at the fees that some of these look at the fees that some of these pension managers charge. Look at the lousy investments that some of these pension management companies put pensioners in. I mean, it's outrageous if you think about it. So I'm
Yeah.
looking for somebody who'll look out for the pensioner and not just the pension managers.
I laugh because when you say that, I think of the legislators in the state of Kentucky, in the state level. And you can run for office in Kentucky and give a good speech, and then you get voted in. You give they give all the teachers money to a hedge fund, and they set it out, at 7% is their idea, and they don't think about the fees that are charged and the ignorance of those people even in California and CalPERS. The fees on Wall Street, that's kind of my high horse, I guess.
Yeah.
You mentioned other busters. I would add David Walker to that list. David Walker.
Yeah, tell me about David Walker. I'm not familiar with him.
So David Walker is a great guy to Google. He was the Comptroller General of the United States. He was the head of the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. He served under very nonpartisan guy. Served under, God, does he go back I don't know if he goes back as far as I think not Reagan, but probably a Bush and a Clinton and all the way up. And he quit it. He boxed up his office and he quit in frustration. He started traveling the country like an Old Testament prophet, saying, look, well, this is a quote from me. He says, our biggest enemy isn't someone hiding in a cave in Afghanistan. It's our own fiscal irresponsibility and our economic irresponsibility. And so I think about these grassroots guys. I see this, and I'm probably jaded because I'm an education advocate at the end of the day. And, I've had a lot of experts on, people like Teresa Gillard-Ducey, for example. They look at this systemically. They look at this as a policy thing that fixes it, policy wise. And I've been a little jaded on that and said, you know what, boys and girls out there in the world, you got to take individual responsibility for your own family, because you cannot risk is related to control. The more control you have, the less risk you bear. The less control you have, the more risk you bear. And if you rely, you mentioned, I thought it was a great comment. We should backtrack that so people understood what you said. If you look at Congress and their saber rattling and their division and how actually dangerous that is if they will allow, out of political pride and political saber rattling, not to pass a budget, to let things go bad, well, then they're going to drop the credit rating because we don't trust your Congress that they would not be above doing that, right? They would absolutely lose. This is a political football to destroy comedy, to blame someone, to point someone's finger.
That's right.
So I'm a huge advocate of individual education. If I look at the electorate and we were to just go to the mall and go jaywalking like Jay Leno used to do, and even ask them about the Fed, they don't even know. I mean, they wouldn't know the first thing about the difference between fiscal policy, monetary policy. The ignorance of the electorate is, I think, one of the major challenges.
Well, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons I wrote this book. I really tried. My goal in writing this book was to really describe some of these structures and some of these dynamics, but also put names to the faces, but in a way that people could understand. And that was really because the people who are in finance and who are making these decisions, and even in government sometimes say it's too complicated, it's too technical. You can't understand it. Leave it to us. And I'm saying, whoa, don't leave it to them. We need to educate ourselves. I agree with you about education. Of course, I'm biased. I'm an educator.
Sure.
But I teach a class called Finance and Society to undergraduates every year. And we talk about student debt. And they say, we don't understand this. There ought to be classes in high school and in college that really teach financial education to these students so they really have the wherewithal to make intelligent decisions about things like student debt. And I'm really with you there, and that's one of the things I've really tried to do with this book.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, if we can digress a bit on student debt. I often when people ask me about student debt, I say this, I go, what would happen to the prices in the real estate market? Just let's take homes, not even commercial. Let's just take residential homes. What would happen to the price of those homes if you made it against the law to go into debt to buy a home? In other words, if you took away the power to buy it, the demand drops. There's two kinds, like when you look at supply and demand, I tell people there's two types. There's desire to buy something, but true demand means you have the desire and the ability to buy something. You got to have both to create demand. Like everyone wants a Ferrari, but the price is prohibitive, right? People don't have the power. So when you lower interest rates or when you make it easy to buy things, more people can participate and prices skyrocket. And, I look at the universities today and I'll go on a university campus. I'm like, this is a freaking resort nowadays. It's crazy the amount of money that, they got when I went, there was a dorm. Now you got a wave pool and you got a lazy river going around. It's crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy how competition for students, you're right, has led to this, country clubization of the university. It's really terrible. But here's the problem, and maybe you have a solution. If we didn't allow students to get the students who can't afford an education, if we didn't allow them to get access to the higher education, then they'd be even further behind. When I talk to my students, I say, okay, this is a capitalist economy. We believe in incentives and individual responsibility and so forth. So most of my students do not believe in the idea of equality of outcome. That is, they don't want everybody
No, no,
to be the
yeah,
same. However, they all believe, and I don't know if I assume you do too, in the idea of equality of opportunity.
of
That
course.
is, everybody should have the same chance. The problem is if you close off the education, higher education, to those who don't have the wherewithal to go, then you're not creating equality of opportunity. So how do we square that circle?
Well, I think there's two ideas here. First of all, I think that the banking system is antiquated, and I think the college education system is antiquated because with the information age, or what now might be the misinformation age, I don't know which we're in,
Mm-hmm.
there's absolutely nothing that can be taught at a university that I can't go and learn on YouTube. There's absolutely nothing. There's nothing taught. There's no secrets at Harvard. There's no secrets at Yale. I educated myself after I got finished with college. My degree was in exercise physiology. We can see that didn't work out either. But there's absolutely
I can't
nothing.
see. You're wearing black like I am.
Yeah, well, there's a reason for
Yeah,
that.
me
There's
too.
the lighting. The
We're both wearing
lighting's up,
black here.
the lighting's upstairs, not downstairs, right?
Right, right, exactly. Yeah.
But in the information age, the access to learning and education, a person can learn anything they want because the massive amount of information, books to read. I mean, you can read anything you want to read. You can get anything you want to get online. And so the problem college has is they have a model that is, I mean, look at high school. We do it the same way we did it. My great-great-great-grandfather founded a large private university in my home state. He's got a big building with his name on it. And, the way he taught, I come from a long line of educators, and the way we teach. I also think banking is antiquated too. When the internet came, there was a destruction of things like travel agents. Very few the number of travel agents just got reduced because you could take away that friction for the most part. And I think the banking is the same way. I don't know where I don't know where digital is going to take us. We should talk about that. I don't know where DeFi should take us, because what's your take? That'd be interesting. What's your take on DeFi to
Well,
simply
yeah.
bypass these antiquated banks?
Well, here's the problem. I agree with you. We need there are technological ways to give everybody access to low cost or even free savings accounts, checking accounts, so forth. So that's why in my book I talk about Fed accounts. That is, everybody could have an account at the Federal Reserve System. Why should it just be for the member banks? Or we could connect it to the postal system. We used to have a postal banking system. They have those in Europe as well. They got rid of ours in 1964. I'm not sure why, but a high-tech postal banking system where everybody can have access to a high-tech account for low cost. It's the internet is cheap, so there isn't any reason why you shouldn't have it. The problem, I talk a lot about crypto in my book. So crypto is an interesting example of DeFi. There are many other examples, but there's this promise in crypto that it's going to be a payment system, a financial system without interference by either the government, boo the government, or the
Yeah.
banks, boo the banks. That it's going to be totally decentralized, totally technically determined. So we're not going to have to depend on trust or faith or any human being touching anything. But we know that that is not the way it worked out.
Yeah, it's not.
So I think that's the danger. We are going to have a lot of high of technology in banking and finance, and we should have it when it's right. But let's not get fooled by it. Let's not believe that it's completely going to be independent of human beings, of trust, of some kind of government regulation and
Yeah,
control. That's a fantasy.
I agree. I think there's a lot to be said for the concept. I think blockchain technology, I don't know why we don't use it to vote. I think it'd be a great applied application of blockchain is, how we vote, things like that. But to say we're going to remove human beings from things human beings touch and need is naive. Maybe that's
Yeah.
not the word, but I think it's I think it's rather neat. Let's talk a little bit in the time we have left. This is, I warned you before we could go 7 hours because I love this stuff. So let's talk
I
about.
went to a bookstore at the airport in Denver the other day, and I said, how about, stocking my book? And they said, what it's about. I said, it's about what's wrong with the financial system. She said, oh, we need about 30 books on that.
I don't know. Part of me, I've written a couple of books. I wrote one on 401ks, and I went to my publisher. I said, on the list of things people say they want to read, it's not going to be very high, right? But
It should be though. Anyway,
let's talk about this. I've interviewed guys like you, from Berkeley, the dean of the business school at Duke. I mean, I get so fortunate to talk to people that are way outside my pay grade intellectually, like way above it. And one of the things I'm hoping maybe I can find a supporter of it. I have yet to find anyone in an economics department anywhere in the country. So maybe you're the first one
we'll see.
that thinks MMT is the solution to things. So here you go, modern monetary theory. Here's your chance to be the first guy that says this is a great idea. We should go full bore behind this. So, ladies and gentlemen,
I'm really sorry to disappoint you.
In fact, I wrote. Whiff.
I wrote a book. What's wrong with MMT? A policy critique. I published it a couple of years ago. Here's the problem. MMT does have some very good things to say. That is some correct things to say in my view. That is that sovereign countries, especially those with key currencies like the U.S. and the United States dollar, we don't need to worry about deficits per se. For me, the key thing is, what do we spend the money on? Is it for education, or is it for bailing out banks? And a balance sheet has two sides: the liability side and an asset side. If you look at the balance sheet of the United States of America, this discussion about the deficit and the debt, it's just looking at the liability side. We also have to look at the asset side. What are we buying with this debt that we're issuing, or this money that we're creating? So that's the problem, in my view. But anyway, but the problem with MMT, I think, is that it kind of it ignores problems in the banking system. That is, this tendency for banks to get over leveraged, to crash the economy every 10 or 15 years, and to demand bailouts from the government. So it really tends to ignore this kind of moral hazard, this I'll be gone, you'll be gone, take the money and run aspect of our financial system. So I wish that they would talk a little bit more about that in their discussion.
I wish we had more time. I want to give a pitch for this book, Busting the Bankers Club. And my audience knows how I do this. I tend to repeat the same pitch, but it makes sense every time I say it, so I keep saying it. One of the blessings I have in my life is I get to hang out with guys like Gerald Epstein and other guys who are smarter than me. And what would be amazing is picture and imagine if you could take Gerald Epstein out to dinner, and pick his brain of someone who studied this and taught this for who knows how long. Would you be willing to spend an hour with him, and would you pick up the tab? If you could, dinner, drinks, whatever, would you pick up the tab? And if the answer to that is yes, assuming you didn't go through the drive-through, assuming you went and had a nice dinner, that'd be quite an investment. And yet, as someone who's written a book, or at least tried to hunt and peck out a few books myself, you can learn so much about what an expert knows by reading their book, far more than you could ever get at a simple dinner. And you can do it for less money. And so that's my pitch that I always give, because to me that makes sense. The idea of learning as much as you can, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the reasons I bring on authors and books. Books are for people who are interested in success, and then coaches are for people who really get committed to success. But it starts with learning in books. And so Busting the Bankers Club, I love this. Finance for the Rest of Us. which that would include me. I'm the rest of us. So it's fabulous that you've done this work. And also I mentioned that it's rather courageous in my view, to write books that decry institutions. It's quite courageous. So I commend you for that. And
Thank you.
I've got about 30 other questions I'd like to ask you. So maybe we'll have you back on the program if you'd be willing to come sometime.
Well, thank you. This has been a real pleasure, and you're a great interviewer, and it's been really great fun for me. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, go out to Amazon.com and buy it today. Go get the Busting the Bankers Club, Finance for the Rest of Us. Learn about this. I wouldn't know if I'd call it a cartel, but these bedfellows of government and the Fed. They've been friends forever, but never formed quite the cartel they have today, I think. And it's important to educate the electorate, your friends. You vote however you want. I'm apolitical. Do whatever you want. But when you go into that booth, do it educated. Systemically, change comes at a geologic pace. But personally, you can do a lot when you learn about how the Fed works. You can do a lot when you learn how interest rates work. You can do a lot as an individual if you become educated. So it works better if we're collectively educated. It works better if we're individually educated. If you'd hang on just a minute, Gerald, while I close the show, then I can properly thank you. You've been listening and watching the Cash Flow Academy podcast. We do our best to make this stuff as simple as we can. You can also drop by yourinvestingclass.com to learn more about what we do if you have an interest there. But we congratulate you for listening and being interested in your own financial education. We'll see you next time.